And we're live. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam, and today we are going to be talking about the long-awaited sight and sound poll from 2022. So you may recognize my friends here. We've done a few Criterion roundtables, and I thought of no better crew of people to talk about the controversial, very interesting poll that has come out came out last week as of recording this, and we have a lot to talk about, everyone. So just to introduce everyone, if this is the first time you're here, we have Elliot Coen.
Hello.
Chris Mohan.
Hello.
And Nathan Jones. And if you're not aware, these are all people in the YouTube space that like to talk about films and physical media. And Chris also likes to talk about books on his YouTube channel as well. So we're just going to chat about the sight and sound poll. So where to start, guys? Seriously, this is just such I don't think this conversation is going to be really scratch the surface on what we actually could be talking about. But I thought I'd start off the conversation by talking about some of the films that have left the list. So we had 20 films, new films on the list, and 20 films have left the list from the 2012 poll. And I wanted to pose the question to you guys: what of those films are you most surprised or expected to actually leave the list? If you're aware of what those films are, if you need me to say what those are. Do you want to go first, Elliot?
So something I was thinking of while I was looking at all the films that have left the list is that there's quite a lot from directors who do have films still on the list. So there's a few Bergman films that have left the list. Probably one of the most famous ones to leave the list is The Godfather Part 2. And perhaps when people were doing their voting, maybe internally they've decided to only vote for one film from one director because they want to kind of get a bit of diversity in there. So that's perhaps why we see, Wild Strawberries, and there were some other Bergman films that have...
Fanny and Alexander.
Yeah, exactly.
Fanny and Alexander.
And that's probably why Godfather Part 2 has left, because people still voted a lot for Part 1. And that's a whole debate about which film is better, which we won't do here.
Yeah.
But that was quite surprising, Godfather Part 2.
I would say that's probably mine. It's surprising because I think it should be in the top 100, but I understand why it's probably left the list because of the emphasis on just like trying to bring as much diversity as possible to the list. So, but yeah.
What's surprising about that though is that it is number 26 in the director's poll, is Godfather Part 2. So it's quite high up in the director's list, yet didn't make it obviously to the big stage, so to speak. Wild Strawberries is the one that hurts me. It's the one that I think I don't want to live in a world where Wild Strawberries isn't in the top 100 films of all time. It's just something like so singular and kind of nice about that, especially compared to a lot of the other stuff that's on the list. It seems like it has
Has Nathan just got the whole list in front of him?
I kind of do, actually.
Nice.
And the other one jumps out to me is Chinatown, but I think Chinatown misses out for other reasons.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking of as well. I think people just don't want to be seen as putting a Roman Polanski film on their top 10.
I literally think that is the reason people don't want to have their name in print saying that they support this filmmaker, basically.
Because I'll go on record saying that I think Chinatown is an amazing film. Like, absolutely
incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Like in basically every aspect, but in particular the screenplay is probably one of the best screenplays of all time. So
I'm in complete agreement. Like Chinatown's just a magnificent film, like it's entertaining, well made, all of the aspects indeed.
How about you, Nathan?
I think you already know what I picked up. Wild Strawberries, I'm going to just echo what Chris said. That one is personally my favorite film. But I mean, what Elliot was saying with Fanny Alexander and Seventh Seal also being off the list, I would kind of expect Seventh Seal to be there out of the three. Maybe Fanny and Alexander. But I mean, obviously Bergman's still on the list. on both lists. But other than Bergman, obviously, something like Lawrence of Arabia was pretty notable for a lot of people, I know. And I think, did it show up on the director's list?
Yeah, I'm not too sure, actually.
Yeah.
But seeing it leave was an interesting thing because obviously there are, some amazing American films from, that time period that are still here. But yeah, it's just cool to see every 10 years some kind of change up, and who knows, these films are going to possibly come back.
Something like Lawrence of Arabia as well.
Yeah,
I mean, I might
Lawrence
be reading.
of Arabia was number 69 on the director's poll.
Nice.
I could be reading too much into this, but perhaps as time goes on and people's attention span gets more strained and we have less free time and stuff.
Only short films.
You don't have time to watch a 4-hour movie.
I'm not sure the number one movie would agree with you there, Elliot.
Save the conversation for the next question, guys.
I'm not
sure. Save the conversation. I know everyone's champing at the bit to talk about this number one pick, but save yourself.
I don't believe everyone watches that film in one go. By the way, that's one thing. But
neither Lawrence or actually most long films I think are very rarely single sitting films. Now, if you even think of something like the Edward Yang films that are notorious very long as well, I watched those in a couple of sittings, and I think they sort of naturally break up into watching them in multiple sittings.
Yeah, I watched Brightest Summer Day in 2 halves, but I did watch Yi Yi all the way through because I started watching it on like a Saturday morning, and I was just so engrossed with my time that I just finished the whole thing in one go. But yeah, generally anything that's maybe 2 hours plus, I just don't have the time to sit. And at least unless I'm in the theater and I have no choice,
that's right.
I generally do break up my longer viewings. That's why so many times these days when I'm scouring my shelves for something to watch, I'm like looking for that 90-minute film. It's just perfect. I'm like, I know I'm going to sit and watch this from start to finish, and I can have a movie experience all the way through apart from breaking it up. But yeah, the longer films tend to get watched over multiple sittings. It's particularly the 7.5 hour film that we have on this list.
Tango's going to be number one. 2032.
Calling it now.
I might even get to watch it by 2032.
Yeah, it'll take you that long to watch it.
Probably,
oh my God.
1 hour per year. You have a couple years of you can
work and rest.
Yeah. There's an intermission year. There's 2 intermissions in the actual film, so you can have 2 intermission years, and that's basically bringing you up to the run time. That's amazing. Yeah, good. I like it. God. Anyway, so the saddest film to leave the list for me is a film that's actually in my top 10 films of all time, and that was Nashville by Robert Altman. Yeah. I dearly, dearly love that film, and again, it's just a list. I mean, I'm not that heartbroken, but also just see like the canon of critics out there in the current, film universe of people who appreciate film not regarding it as basically one of the greatest films of all time, sort of like makes me sad that it's fallen out of favor. Basically, it doesn't change that the film's amazing and like one of the greatest pieces of art that came out of the 70s, in my humble opinion. But yeah, that was sad to see. But again, that's a very long film, so and I'm not sure why people don't appreciate that as much now.
I think Nashville is a film, and certainly when you look at modern society and the advent of influencers, Instagram, etc., it's a kind of film that has inspired a lot of other films in that over that kind of idea, and a lot of people would kind of group a lot of those together. Kind of like I watched Vox Lux recently, which to me was very reminiscent of something like Nashville as well, looking at the modern celebrity and how the rise of the pressures that go on people in various parts of public life. It can be tough, and I was kind of thinking, this is very, very like that. It's definitely riffing off that. It might even have been totally inspired by it, but it's a very common theme, I think, more and more these days. But I'm surprised as well, because I thought Nashville was sort of gaining popularity over the past 10 years rather than kind of losing it.
Yeah. Too close to home for me, so.
Something just to sort of go off the back of what you've just said, Chris, with you expected some films to gain popularity. I I just to plug myself, I made a video of like my 3 wishes, expectations, and shocks for the poll. I literally made it like 6 hours before the poll went live, and I posted it at like 1 o'clock in the morning, because I just felt I needed to get my thoughts out there before it went live, and then people couldn't say, oh, you made these wishes and it's come true after the fact. But anyway, never mind. And one of my expectations was that the films of Edward Yang would like skyrocket up the list. Like I was so adamant that Yi and A Bright Summer Day would like crack the top 50 because of just how they're incredible films, and just the availability and accessibility and like things like restoration and distribution of these films now compared to 10 plus years ago, like allows like more critics to be able to see these films. And I think I overestimated how much of an impact that would actually make on how voting would be, because they're still both in the top 100, as I'm very, very pleased to see. I think A Brighter Summer Day climbed slightly higher, but Yi was lower on the list this time around, barely making it into the top 100, I think. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Like, because I really thought that, you know, we're in the sort of the best time for accessibility with streaming, video on demand, Blu-ray discs, and just all this accessibility, which is just at its peak now. I really thought that would have a major impact on how, because so many films just aren't as well seen. Things like Satyajit Ray's films, like Panther Panchali and stuff. Like, you know, it's just another example of just it now being more accessible to people, and reason why it's on the list now. So
I would kind of add to that. I mean, I do remember just seeing just the list in general, and thinking about that accessibility and the amount of attention to detail. Because I mean, thinking about the list, looking at all the ones I pulled, as well, thinking how many criterions were on this list. It's absolutely insane. But also just thinking about more and more of the streaming services, the physical media side, you know, I guess the world that we all live in, and people who are watching this. I think time will tell, and I think, you know, the next 10 years we're going to see more of Edward Yang getting closer, and, you know, stuff like I know Tropical Malady and like Memoria are like really big films, but like are really hard to like access, and a lot of these types of films I think are going to start getting higher and higher and higher because we have the ability to watch them all, you know. So there's a lot.
I'm going to be pessimistic and say I don't think they will climb higher. I think in 10 years' time, the film audiences are going to be swaying more towards more modern things. I don't know what it is. It's like the whole TikTok thing with like short attention spans, and people having the motivation and interest in sitting down and watching these really long films. There's always going to be an audience for these sort of things, but as like people who are like, say, 16 now, in 10 years time, their film viewing journeys and experiences are going to be very different from people now. And I do think that some of these films, like the Edward Yang films, will probably not make the cut next time, which makes me sad, but that's just how I feel like film culture is going. For good or for, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying how I think things are going to go in the future. So just to counterpoint what you're saying, Nathan, but I do want them to jump higher. Like I really wish they did, because I really feel that they are, both of those films are two of the 100 greatest films ever made. And I really need to see more Edward Yang's films. I haven't seen anything else by him, but I don't think they're widely accessible. So, yeah, that was just my interjection there.
I agree with Sam, because I think accessibility is kind of a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword, because it's great that we can now access these films, but it doesn't mean that people have more time to actually spend to, you know, watch these films. We've all got films that are on our shelves that we keep saying we're going to watch one day, but we still haven't actually watched. So it could be that people have these films like on their watch list, and they're just like, they keep saying to themselves, I'm going to save it for such and such an occasion, and they just haven't watched them yet. I know I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, there's a thing of, for any film to be in your top 10 films list, you've probably seen it more than once, even. And the chances of seeing an Edward Yang film more than once in the short space of time that they've even been accessible, I think is probably a lot lower. Like, you think of some of the other films that have been on this list longer, like Satin Tango, right? Has been on here, steadily been rising because it's been accessible, but also been, more available, more chance to people to see it multiple times. They appreciate the art of it, etc. And I think, there is a chance that it could rise, because I do agree. I think both Ye and Brighter Summer Day are phenomenally great pieces of filmmaking. And they're the kind of films that you could do an hour and a half, 2 hour stream just discussing those just by themselves, and actually only basically scratch the surface of it. Then Brighter Summer Day is one of my favorite things to even discuss with people that have seen it for the first time, because the questions that I have about it are almost certainly different from the questions that somebody next to me has about it, and all that kind of stuff. So I'd love to see them climb higher, but the fact that there's 2 Edward Yang films in this list at all is phenomenal, especially when you consider something like Kobayashi has none, who I think Saki Kobayashi is probably, in my opinion, the greatest filmmaker that has ever lived, but has none of them on here.
That's crazy. Yeah.
This kind of reminds me of I know I'm not going to try to jump in here, Sam, but I feel like this would be naturally in that third question you had, kind of tie in with it pretty well. I don't know.
Yeah, we can talk about expectations for the list. We can don't have to do anything in order here. So so I posed the question prior to the conversation here, like prior to the list being published, were there any expectations you had for the list? As I just mentioned, the Yi and Bright Summer Day, I expected to jump much higher, and they're both represented still, but they did not go as high as I expected them to. So is there anything prior to the list being published that you guys thought, you know what, this is going to happen on the list, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen, and then it didn't? Is there anything? You want to go first, Elliot?
There was one thing, and you're going to like this, Sam. I genuinely thought Mulholland Drive would be number 1 on the list.
I thought
that was a genuine belief. So I'm actually surprised that, even though it's very high, I thought it would be even higher.
Wow, what you thought? Why do you think that? Because it's a modern film. Last time it was the only modern film since 2000 to be on the list. It recently, was it last year or the year before, it topped the top 100 American Film Institute films. Yeah.
From something, I can't remember the criteria for that one. And it's, David Lynch is massively popular with critics and filmmakers. Mm-hmm. I just thought that was just a shoe-in for, the top 3. So
interesting.
Just surprised.
Hmm.
What about you, Chris?
I thought it was going to be number 1 as well. But
really?
I thought the likely things. Well, it's one of. It just seemed like the chic pick, that if you were picking a top 10 films of all time, you're thinking, I've got to pick one from recent times that ticks all the boxes. Mulholland Drive is that film, and I think it was probably, when you look at the list, kind of hurt in some way by the fact that things like Beau Travail and stuff were also in there, because they're that modern kind of chic pick and well picked. So it probably split the vote there some way. The other 2 that I had were both the same as yourself. I expected a couple of different genre films. I was quite surprised that Get Out made it out of genre cinema. I thought that was very surprising, especially given its recency kind of bias that would count against it. And that actually the only animated ones are 2 Ghibli ones, I think, which are 2. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm so glad they made it. I think they're both magnificent, but that there hasn't been any other animated films that made the list. That seems narrow, if you know what I mean. Whereas the list seems diverse.
Yeah.
I mean, I think over time we'll see more animated films for sure jump into this list. I think time is a huge factor with a lot of these, obviously, and just looking at that last poll in 2012, talking about Mulholland Drive being the only one past 2000, and now seeing 4 films in the last 5 years in that list now. I think there's 4. I want to say Portrait, Get Out, Parasite, and I want to say there might be one more. Moonlight? Yeah.
Moonlight, sorry, yes, it is, yeah.
So those films, how recent they are, that's pretty insane to me. And see Portrait jump so high. is also an interesting thing. But only time will tell where these films will go. But I don't have any other thoughts. I have one more. My expectations.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think very much like yourself, Sam. I thought that Tokyo Story might take number one.
That was my bet. That was my bet. Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, it's still in the top 5. So seeing it there, it makes sense. But maybe that is a transition to the I would say this, but the number one pick kind of counters what I was going to say. The takeaway from the slower cinema. I think once things happen over some time periods, we'll just see where that goes. But besides that, not talking about like the top 10, there are a few things that I would expect to be there eventually. One that I just wanted to bring up in particular that I'm just adore, but obviously I think the film that is in this list that really kind of gave it a little bit of the I'm trying to think of the right word, inspiration to make this film is already there. And so I was going to talk about Pan's Labyrinth. I expect this eventually to make the top 100 list. But I think Spirit of the Beehive would probably be the one that would kind of usurp it a little bit, since Del Toro just has such a fascination with that film. But I don't know. Did any of you guys have anything in your list that are like, I can see this eventually coming into the top 100 someday?
The film that I had picked before, I was sure the Thing was going to make it. I felt sure John Carpenter's The Thing was going to make it, and I know why it didn't. But I did think when you spread the votes out as widely as we would get more genre. I just thought we would get a broader spread of people that will pick, that one film that defines that part of their cinematic journey. I even seen a couple of lists. Somebody put there's something about Mary as one of their 10 picks and stuff like that. I thought that was great. That's clear. If I was creating an honest list for myself, that's one I've got to put on it and stuff. So I thought the Thing would have been a common enough pick with enough people that might have worked. Yeah. But no.
I think going on from that point, I think one of the major downfalls in the whole system of doing this poll is that the people's top 10 lists are made public. It would actually probably be much better if the top 10 lists, even though I like looking at them, if they weren't public, then people wouldn't have this kind of fear that they're going to be shamed for picking, Mad Max Fury Road or something that's kind of seen as a genre, big blockbuster movie.
Some people picked that though, didn't they? There were some people in there.
Some people did, but what I'm saying is I think more people.
Yeah, sure.
Would feel comfortable picking The Thing or picking.
It's going back to what I said about people voting for a Polanski film. They don't want to be. Oh,
exactly. Yeah.
This person supports a director that's problematic. Like it can possibly tarnish your image and stuff like that, I guess, to some people. So I could probably understand why some people wouldn't want to share that they love a film director's work. Way.
And I just think, love it or hate it, the list now is more political than ever. And that is purely because the world is more political than ever. People are more engaged because of social media and, the news cycle. Everyone has some kind of political take. So, you've kind of got to be careful about what you put in your top 10 list, depending on how you want to appear to people,
Yeah.
Representation is important to see. So if you're making a top 10 list and it's going to be public, you've got to represent who you are as a person on that list and on those films that you pick. And I think that's why you get that very diverse thing. I remember seeing an interview, I think it was about 2 years ago, somebody indicated this with Christopher Pettit or Petit or whatever you call him. The guy did Radio 1 and then did a couple of other things. And he said when he was making his list for them, he wanted to pick 10 films that he didn't think would be represented by many people. He accepted that a lot of people would have picked from the same kind of 100 list, their version of the 10, and he very much was very no, I'm going to do 10 of what I think will not be seen, so that when his list gets published, people will find 10 recommendations with which to go watch films. And I thought that I could see a lot of people doing that, especially people that are within the industry or people that they're in the middle of it, and they might do that. Yeah.
It is interesting thinking about the different criteria people put on how they voted, because I know we'll talk about them, but talking about Paul Schrader, he had his own criteria. Like, I know he said something about, like, I don't want any experimental films in this list, and things like that. I do think it's interesting to think about it through that lens, but also thinking about it, going back to The Thing and even Pan's Labyrinth. I mean, the lack of certain genres is quite an interesting thing. Horror in particular, science fiction got a pretty good running this go around, which normally I don't feel like it does in like other things besides this poll. But animation has like 2 things, and there's a lot of other like comedies too. Comedies are like, unless it's a classic comedy, it's not going to be put in this list, which is really interesting. Because I would love to see like Monty Python and the Holy Grail there one day, like personally, because I think that is one of the most influential films, at least in my life. But everyone has their own list, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well,
sorry, go on, Chris.
I was going to say we tried to do our own top 100 list, if you remember, a few months ago, and it's like it's just it's an impossible thing to do, even for 100. Never mind 10.
Yeah.
I made that list public on my letterbox, and then a day later I locked it because I was like, "This isn't me. This isn't who I am. I need to change this." And then I was like tinkering with it, and I'm like, "This is just like a silly task to put on somebody." I'd love to actually finish, and maybe like when I'm really old and I've lived my life,
like my age,
when you're about Chris's age, right? When you're coming towards the end, and,
we don't even know how true that may or may not be.
You're gonna have Billy Madison on that list. I know it.
That's Billy Madison, indeed. 14 spaces higher than the red shoes. I know.
Fantastic. I love it.
But yeah, I think it's important to remember that even this list, and it's called the greatest films of all time, it's still a subjective list.
Yeah.
Just because it's an aggregation of a few thousand people's opinions, it's still just a bundle of opinions.
Yeah.
And when you think about the amount of people in the world that watch films and enjoy films, I mean, most of the films on this list would not be on the list if you were able to ask everyone in the world what they think are the top 10 films. So, I think these lists are interesting to look at and to view, and they're good to discover new films, but they're not worth getting, emotional about or like arguing on the internet and wishing that a certain film was number 1. Look, I'd love Barry Lyndon to be number 1, but it doesn't make a spot of difference to me if Jean Dielman's number 1,
I mean, you tried your best, let's be honest, over an extended period of time. You couldn't have tried any harder.
Yeah, I was really pushing the last few years, and I want to think that I at least got a few people to vote for it.
I think Criterion's noticed. They're like, maybe.
Yeah.
I thought that as well. I mean, there's films on this list that I genuinely don't really like, but I think it's really cool that there's enough people also really like it to kind of say, like, my opinion doesn't even really matter, though, if you know what I mean. That's the whole thing of art, is that you watch it and appreciate it, and even at different times you may think it's great, and then other times you watch it and think it's not so great. But I think that
it's good that it exists because it's getting the word out about all of the films on this list. Jean Dielman is a film that I don't like, as you saw on my letterboxd, but I'm glad it's there on the list, and I'm glad it's going to get more people watching the film and talking about it, because otherwise a lot of the films on this list, they're at risk of just disappearing in the next 50, 100 years. Cinema is still a very young art form when you compare it to all of the other art forms. So people talk about this list as the canon of cinema, but I don't think a film canon has even been established at all yet. I think it's gonna, if film survives another 100 years, 200 years, that's when you'll start seeing something, solidifying.
Sadly, we will never see it.
Why not?
No, because there'll be the No, here's the thing. There will be the singularity. We will merge with artificial intelligence, so we'll still be around.
Okay. We're going to transfer our essence into robotic beings and live on forever.
It's coming. The AI will be. You just. Rather than sitting down and watching any of the films on this list, you will go down and ask the AI, can you give me Guillermo del Toro representation of Wild Strawberries, and you'll
yeah. Can you give me Barry Lyndon 2, directed by Stanley Kubrick?
Yeah, exactly. That's what's going to happen.
TikTok films are going to be
in 3 minutes or less.
In 100 years, all films will be in the vertical format. There'll be no widescreen.
Oh, you're breaking my heart, mate. Oh no, because I can see it happening.
Bars on the side, instead of top and bottom.
You'll literally go, but they'll still be in theaters. You still go to a theater. It's just the screen will be like the
big screen,
the thing from 2001.
Like the ring.
What's it called?
The obelisk.
What's it called? I can't remember what it's called. The monolith.
The monolith.
The monolith from 2001. It's just the black. Yeah, Kubrick knew. He knew what was happening. Big oblong black screens going to control everything.
Remember, he had iPads in that film. There were iPads in 2001, so he knew what was happening.
I think you're being very optimistic, Sam, that we'll even be, interacting with other humans on a face-to-face basis in about 50 years. I don't think that's really a thing.
Yeah, you're probably right. So, question that's just come to my mind. Try as best as you possibly can. This is very difficult, but can you even potentially begin to answer the question, what do you think is objectively the best film ever made?
No, there's no answer for me, at least. I don't think you can even arrive at that.
Because there are acceptable answers, yeah.
The thing is, right, if you're asking me what the most objectively best film of all time is, who is creating the criteria to work out what the greatest film is of all time? You need to at least set the criteria to then assess which film is the greatest. But I don't think you can, because if you look at Jean Dielman and Vertigo, two completely different films, how do you even begin to compare them? I just don't think it's possible to look at cinema objectively.
Okay.
I think it's possible to have some acceptable answers, though. I think if you look and I look at the director's list and I go 2001 as a top film of all time, I can understand that. I mean, you look at it. For a lot of people, they'd say it's boring, dry, all of those things, and they'd also be true. But I think it's an acceptable answer. It's the same as like the best song of all time, best album of all time, best video game of all time. I think there's certain things that people would nod and say, yeah, I think that's a reasonable answer.
In the conversation.
Yeah.
But the question is why? Why is 2001 so great? It's when you start to dig deep into why. It becomes a lot looser, and people can't agree on certain things.
There's a lot of films like that I don't like, but I respect. That I'm like, well, that was amazing filmmaking. I really loved the cinematography, and I really I understood where the director was coming from, but ultimately the themes, on an emotional level, didn't pay off for me. But then objectively, the individual technical aspects of the film are just remarkable. Things as an example, Satan Tango is one of those films for me. I really don't like that film very much at all, but I do think that the film is a milestone and one of the most impressive films in terms of its ambition and its scope and just what it's trying to do. But ultimately, I think it didn't connect with me on an emotional level. But that's more of the subjectivity, whereas the objectivity is just all the technical aspects of everything were just outstanding, which is why I think it does deserve to be on this list. But also, I wouldn't care if it wasn't, because I don't particularly like it in terms of I got nothing emotionally from it apart from being very impressed with how it was all put together and just what the director did to make it, sort of thing. So I think that's where I was going with my objectivity sort of thing. But I do agree with you, Elliot. I didn't really think about the question. It just came to my mind that it's very hard, because as soon as you start going into, well, what makes something objectively good, you're then that's subjective.
Yeah.
So
the thing is, it's not a question we're going to solve here, because it's as old as time itself, that discussion about subjectivity versus objectivity. But I can think of so many films that are objectively very well made, but they just appear very sterile to me, and I just don't connect. I think it's an interesting discussion for sure.
Not to add too much. I mean, because I agree with the fact that objectivity is subjective. But I think seeing maybe the different lists of like critics and directors, I think that is maybe a little bit closer, just in parameter wise, like where you can see the differences of how some people come at different things. I think that's the only way to really go is honestly is to break people into categories, which is really weird because it's like, what type of filmmaker are you, or how do you digest film? But everyone's different. Even some of our greatest filmmakers are like some of the biggest movie fans. Like Edgar Wright is somebody who's just constantly watching movies, right? And Del Toro is too, and Scorsese, and but there's a lot of different parameters put onto different things. But I feel like the only way we could even think about objectivity is like having different categories, and that's the only thing I can think of.
And something, if I can just add one more thing, I think it's important that people should feel comfortable in being authentic about their opinions about films, and not feel the need that if they don't like Barry Lyndon or any film that I really like, they don't have to feel the need to say, well, I recognize that it's great, but I just don't like it. You're allowed to say that you think it's bad. If you don't like it, you're allowed to say that. And I say that about films that, I don't connect with. In some way, if I don't connect with a film, yes, I see it's a failure in my part, but also a failure of the filmmaker in some way to not be able to connect to me.
I think that's one of the worst aspects of these kind of lists, is that it encourages gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Of you can't say that about this film, or you can't exclude this or whatever. None of us own any of this kind of stuff, or the opinion of the rights of it. And actually, as you quite rightly said, I love and embrace the fact that there are films here that I genuinely dislike, but that enough people actually really enjoy to actually have it way high up this list.
Would you like to share what some of those films are, Chris, with us? So you're on record saying it.
So I'll go for a couple. Daughters of Dust, which is a Judi Dench film, I watched, and there's definitely a barrier to entry in terms of language, etc. But I just don't think culturally I get it. I don't understand culturally where it comes from, and it became a real slog for me to watch. I can appreciate it was beautifully shot, well made, but just doesn't hit for me. Even something like Breathless and stuff like it. Goddard in general, I think. I don't think I'm alone in this kind of times I watch it and go, I really enjoyed the craft, but not for me. So there's a couple. That's spring to mind.
Sacrilege to a lot of cinephiles, but Goddard is not a director I gravitate towards.
Yeah, I firmly believe that. I believe it's impossible to like all of these films on this list. And anyone that says they like all of these films,
lying.
They're just lying to save face. Like I truly believe that. So I applaud when people are being honest, about their opinions, even if it's about films that I really like. You shouldn't wear these films as part of your personality. You shouldn't get insulted if someone says something bad about a film that you like, because it really doesn't matter in the end.
So what do we think about the discourse then around online about mainly? Let's just talk about the elephant in the room a bit more. Jean Dillman being number one, and I think where was it, like 30 something last 10 years ago. It's like going back to exactly what we were just talking about, but it's important that something like this is being discussed. Is more important than it being on number one on the list, like being brought to the attention. Like, just for instance, on my Letterboxd, just seeing the amount of reviews that people are dropping for this film, because they've probably never seen it before, or if they have, they're like thinking, oh, I wasn't too keen on it the last time I saw it, maybe 15, 20 years ago, but now that it's on like number one on the list, I think I'll give it a revisit and see what I think of it. And for a lot of people, it's their first time viewing it. I'll admit, until this list dropped, I hadn't seen it. Same. Now I have, and I have very mixed opinions on the film. It's another one that I appreciate, but I didn't connect emotionally to. I definitely think it's better than Satan Tango, so I'll say that right now.
So list is accurate.
I'm just going to attack Satan Tango. No, it's that it wasn't as it because I love slow cinema. Like it's some of the even like things like 2001 is basically slow cinema, right?
For sure.
And some of my other favorite films of all time, like Stalker, is slow cinema. I absolutely adore Stalker, which is on this list as well. But yeah, Jean Dillman just didn't do it for me. But I think it's important that it's on here for the reasons of representation, and obviously the BFI, which organised the Sight and Sound poll, have done a lot of work in recent years to give more voices to females, to the LGBTQ community, people of colour, and I think it's fantastic. And obviously this is hugely represented in the list. Things like Portrait of a Lady on Fire jumping to number 30 is very much a sign of the culture in film at the moment, with representation. Personally, I think it's potentially an overcorrection for a film like that to have jumped too high. Then maybe that's a hot take and you don't agree with me. That's absolutely fine. But I do think Portrait is incredible. It was my favorite film of the year. It came out in 2019, was it? Mm-hmm. But to say that that's the greatest film, a 30th greatest film of all time after being out for 3 years, it's a bold statement. But I think that's what it is. It's a statement about these voices need to be made louder than what they have been in the past. And for that reason, I'm very happy that all these different films that have been very controversial are here, because these voices need to be heard and be more, widely seen by people. So yeah, it's good. It's good stuff.
I got something to kind of piggyback on that, which is kind of where I came at this, looking at obviously Jean Dillman being number one, but just seeing all those leaps. Get Out being at 90, I guess 100, 95, all stuck at this.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about all the ties and all that stuff, but anywho, but seeing all the different the voices, because like I have right here, there's almost 400 directors for the Directors Poll. It doubled in the critics at 1639. Just and in my opinion, maybe it's not even an opinion, I don't necessarily know, but I think this poll is more accurate this year than it was 10 years ago, and it will keep getting more and more accurate. And when I say that, I mean like in the world of cinema, and because we're having more and more voices. And I think the polls always has been political. I think it's just more political, like Elliot was saying, than it has ever been, per se, just because of how the climate of the culture is. But I think it's a sign of a good thing, because we're going to see, like in 10 years, I think we're going to be really blown away by what changes. And because I feel like the time span between 2012 and 2022 seems so short compared to like 2012 and like 2002. Like, I feel like there wasn't much change, and there's only going to be more change as time goes on, because cinema is so young, right? As we were talking about earlier. And so I think having more voices, having more people involved in these polls, obviously this is, still relatively recent because it's been a week since it's been out, since we're recording this. But I think it's interesting that Jean Dillman got number one. I watched it for the first time as well. I just wanted to kind of put my thoughts out of like, I'm glad that it's going to get more and more crazy over the next 10 years and 30, because I think it sparks these discussions, and it sparks people to be like, maybe I should check it out. And like we were saying, you don't have to like the film. You don't have to like the films in the list, where they're at. But yeah, it's interesting.
It's just having an informed opinion on it as well, apart from like judging something before you've seen it. Because I can imagine there's been a bunch of people that have gone, Jean Dillman number one, and they haven't seen it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I couldn't believe it, because when the list dropped, I was getting ready to go to work. I was on a night shift, and I saw Chris put in our chat that we have, like, wow, this list is crazy, something to that effect.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, oh my god, what am I missing out on? I can't believe it. And for some reason, the list wouldn't load on my phone, so it was like the script wasn't loading on my phone for the list, so I was just seeing like jargon, like gobbledygook text, and I was like, what is the number one? I can't believe it. Why can I not find this information out? And because I kept like searching what is number one on the thing, and it was like, rumor has it like Vertigo isn't number one. I'm like, just tell me what number one is, please. And then when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's impressive. Like, I hadn't seen the film because it was one of the films from the last poll that I was like on my list to watch, but I hadn't got around to it yet because I knew a little bit about what the film was about, and the time, the run time of the film can be intimidating. I think it's like 3 hours 20 minutes, and if you're not accustomed to slow cinema, this film has a pretty big like barrier entry, I think, for a lot of people. There's going to be maybe some casual or semi interested in sort of this side of cinema who may try and watch this film and just be completely turned off by it. But I think there needs to be more sort of like educational things to do with this sort of side of cinema, these sorts of lists, and give more context about why this is important, like up front. At least I feel that way anyway. But yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
There's so much to say about
I'm hearing static from someone.
Yeah.
I think it might be from you, Sam.
Yeah.
Static.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
It's gone. It's gone.
Okay.
Yeah, you're gone. As the person who had released a video on John Dillman before this list came out, it was quite interesting to see it tick up in views ever since that, and actually the discourse that it created. You kind of touched it there. My biggest problem with John Dillman, and it is a film that I do quite like. I really like slow cinema. I like it's the epitome of slow cinema, because slow cinema to me is where you watch somebody do as realistically day-to-day actions as you can, and the small things are the things that make the difference. So those are the things that you're really trying to pick at. But I also think this list is used by people as a way into cinema. And as you quite rightly said, if you're going in watching Jean Dillman as the greatest film, it nearly invalidates the rest of the list if you didn't like it, if you know what I mean. You've got to remember that this list is made up of people who watch lots of films. Like, primary hobby, primary job, whatever it is, they've watched a lot of cinema, and there's something about Jean Dillman that stands out for them to include it in their top 10 in some way, shape, or form. And I think, taken from that viewpoint, it makes complete sense why it would appear in enough lists, because that's really what this is about, is that it's appeared in enough lists that it ends up as number one. But I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that it is number one. I think it is a film that is not entertaining in any way, shape, or form. To be number one, I think is problematic. It's very much an art house cinephile take on cinema. And, as great as it is that we have a female director at number one, again, I think that does more harm than good. And I think Chantal Akerman's talked about the fact that also this film ruined her career because of the expectation that it created after the fact, you know.
Yeah. And she also said that she hates comparing films to other films, and she hates awards and lists. So if she was alive today, she would hate that this is number one.
So this was the line that was missing in Alanis Morissette's ironic song, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with Chris, because an analogy to that is when people are looking to get into French cinema, usually the first film they watch is Breathless, and then they don't like it, and then they don't watch any more French films ever. And you imagine like all the stuff they're missing out on because the first impression was something that they didn't connect with. So it is a worry that maybe someone would come to this list, they start at number one and they aim to go, down to 100, and they stop because they don't like number one or number two or number three,
Well,
so,
what's the rest of the list got in store for me if I'm not liking what is meant to be the best? You know what I mean? It's
It's something interesting that's tied to that, but I kind of feel like Citizen Kane's in the same category of discussion for a lot of people. I mean, I'm still not the biggest fan of that film. I like it. But I think for a lot of people, for the decades that it was number one, like seeing it, if you're not into cinema at all, checking that film out, like, what the hell did I just watch? A lot of people I know that aren't. They always ask me about recommendations. I'm not going to recommend Citizen Kane. I'm not going to recommend John Dielman. Those aren't films I'm going to recommend, especially when it's like, how do I tackle this list? It's like, well, see what you've seen, and then just do a little bit of research if you want to jump into those similar types of films, but you're not expected to. And that's the hard thing about this list. But I think we've already been kind of covering that. So.
Got an interesting little, not a game, but just a little thing for us to do here. So if I share this one again,
feel the pressure rise whenever.
No. It's very straightforward. I'm just thinking. So we've got this is the Sight and Sound. Yeah. So this is just the critics poll. Of these top 10 films, which film do you think is the best recommendation for someone to get into cinema?
Either Vertigo or Singing in the Rain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vertigo for me.
Yeah, Vertigo.
I'd say Singing in the Rain is probably the most accessible film in this list.
The only thing is, I know loads of people that hate musicals, and they'll just
I get that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd say Vertigo, or In the Mood for Love, maybe. I don't know.
I'm trying to think of the wide scale appeal of that.
I think the top
Obviously
10 list is problematic for that very reason, though, because all of them are sort of a bit dense or a bit mood piece or something of that ilk, and not really kind of something that somebody will come away and go, "Oh, that blew my socks off." They're a 3 or 4 watcher, a lot of them.
No one's recommending Man with a Movie Camera. Is the first one.
I was going to say that. Thinking about all those reminiscent of those times.
Yeah, it's really relatable, that one.
Yeah. Chris remembers when that came out in cinemas.
Chris remembers that.
For God's sake.
I was going to talk about a pain in colour in my day, but there you go.
I do love Man in the Movie Camera, though. Absolutely blew my socks off the first time I saw that. I do love that.
It's cool that Sunrise is even 11. I think Sunrise is a very good pick to have that high. These films that are so old.
That's
camera that is.
That Man in the Movie Camera is not really super accessible, but like Sunrise for a silent film, it might be one of the more accessible ones.
Yes, I would agree.
Definitely. Like if you want to show someone a silent film for the first time, like Sunrise is hard to beat for a first silent picture viewing experience, I think. Trying to think of one off the top of my head that might be a better one, but I can't.
Chaplin films, right? For most
true. Chaplin probably, definitely for the more lighter-hearted comedy aspects of things. But
and didn't 3 of his films drop out of the list as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say Great Dictator in there at all.
Yeah, no. Great Dictator dropped out. What other ones?
Kids or Modern Times?
Modern Times was there, right?
Yeah, I think City Lights dropped out.
City Lights dropped out.
Here's a question: has anybody seen or heard of Meshes of the Afternoon?
I've heard of it.
No,
I've heard of it, but I never watched it.
Had never heard of it.
Honestly. Actually, this is a little shout out. My old roommate, he's incredibly involved with experimental film and is constantly talking about experimental film, and he was ecstatic that film was in that list. So that's to you, buddy. But also, it is interesting to think about, like I was saying earlier, with like the different criteria, like how do people, put things together as like, oh, I want to check this box off in my top 10. I think that's the more interesting thing to think about. Like, because I feel like all of us would come at this very differently with where we put our top 10 of things. We might have some overlaps, but that's, we're not going to have probably more than 2 or 3.
Has anyone seen News from Home?
No, I've not seen that.
No, the other Chantal Ankerman film in the list. I'd heard of it. Again, I'd heard of it, but I hadn't seen it, and I was surprised to see it. So, is that a documentary?
I don't know.
Let me have a look.
Is that the one she made it in New York, I think? Or she had one film that was set in New York. I think.
Yeah, it's Phil. Yeah, lives in New York. Belgian filmmaker, lives in New York. Filmed images of the city accompanied by texts of her loving mother back in Brussels. So yeah, it's sort of like it's almost like a vlog, like a film vlog that it sounds like. I've not seen it, so I don't know. So if anyone in the comments wants to correct me on that, because I've probably blasphemed here to some Chantal Ackerman super fans, but that's what it sounds like, sort of like a proto vlog of like her filming her day in life and stuff, and reflecting on home, being in Belgium and stuff. So but yeah, like I need to make it my quest to now watch the updated list and get everything watched before the next one comes out in 10 years time.
Easy.
Yeah, other films that I'm really happy that are in the list, let's bring this back up again, is like The Leopard.
Yeah, love The Leopard.
So good. Other things.
Like, if somebody said to me The Leopard was number 1 on the list, I mean, there's another one I would go, I could see why somebody would, or enough people would say The Leopard was the greatest film of all time. I think it's, again, possibly underseen. One of those things. I think it's terrific. Imitation of Life's the one. I think it's about 75 or so. Melodrama makes the top 100. I think is excellent, and yeah, especially as that film is sort of dated as well, even in terms of viewpoint and that kind of stuff. But it still makes that list.
That movie's about to come out physically finally.
No, it's the earlier versions coming out. It's not actually the surf version, I believe.
Gotcha. Different one. Surprised that if Douglas Sirk isn't here, thinking about. I mean, I guess Ollie is here, so I guess the film that inspired Fassbender is right there.
Love Ali, Furious of Soul, amazing. I love Blade Runner as well. Yeah. I'm a very hit and miss. I'm mostly miss on Ridley Scott. I also have to say, if I'm being honest, I think some of his films are good, but the only 2 films that I think are great are Blade Runner and Alien. That's maybe a hot take, but I just don't connect with a lot of his work. But I do think Blade Runner. But then on this list, it doesn't state which cut of the film. Are they saying the original theatrical cut is the greatest film of all time, 58th greatest film of all time? Because that really is not, in my opinion, and a lot of fans of the film, the theatrical cut is not anywhere near close to the director's cut or the final cut, and that's
get rid of it. That's it. Drop Blade Runner.
That invalidates Blade Runner being on here, because like the preferred cuts of like so many people is not like the original cut that came out. So,
and same with Apocalypse Now as well, which
exactly
people are talking about.
Exactly. I haven't seen the final cut yet. I do have the 4K disc up there, but I haven't watched that. I've seen Redux and the original, and I do think that the.
And which part of Rashomon is the best part?
Yeah.
Which angle are we looking at this story from?
Yeah.
Love to see Mirror on this list.
Way too high. I know what you're thinking.
Way too.
And this is a film that I haven't seen it yet, and I've actually just purchased the Criterion disc, so I'm very much looking forward to Daisy's. Turning up and giving that a go. I've heard many a great thing about it, and I think just reading the synopsis of the film, that I think it's going to be something I'm very going to enjoy. It's very rebellious, it seems. So have any of you seen Daisy's?
Yeah.
Do you enjoy it? Is it good?
Yeah, it's good. It's a bit mad. It's also very short. I think it's 80 minutes.
Yes,
so
another short film.
You can do it,
Top 5 confirmed 2032.
Brilliant.
Yeah, no, it is good, and it's just had a Criterion release with the new restoration. It is on the second run disc, but that's an older version.
Cool. Right. Should we just have a quick look at the?
I was surprised that. Sorry, one more thing. I was surprised to see Celine and Julie go boating from Jacques Rivette. I can't remember if that was on the list last time.
Don't think it was.
But his films, if you like David Lynch, I feel like some of his films are quite like
Rivette,
out there like that. Yeah,
I do like what I've seen. Chris Marker's 2 films, been Le Sans Soleil and Le Jeté, are both on the list, which again I think is a bit head scratchy.
Sam's rubbing Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, it's number 13. I don't know. whether that is an omen for something or.
well, to be fair, it's joint 12th.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of 12 and seeing Taxi Driver, did you see Gaspar Noé's little comment about that one?
No, what did he say?
He said the main character in this film is my hero. I'm like,
does not surprise me about Gaspar.
No.
He's I think he's one of the more interesting people working today. But yeah, he's an interesting individual. Yeah, I loved his top 10 list. Speaking about top 10 list of the director's poll, what film this? I've not seen it yet, so I don't have an opinion. But this being this high, like, am I being crazy and thinking that this is like a hot take from the directors, or is it that influential? Because I know it's one of Gaspar Noé's favorite films. I know it wasn't on Martin Scorsese's list, but I know he thinks this film is one of the most important films ever made from like interviews that I've read with him. So I know it's obviously very influential for directors because it's in their top 100 at number 77, no less.
It falls into the same category as Jean Dielman for me. Like, I can appreciate certain aspects of it, but I just don't like the film at all. So
it's definitely one of the more political choice. Well, I mean, the film is political, but I think it is probably what.
I was saying Pasolini. That was Pasolini as a filmmaker.
Yeah. But it's interesting. It's more infamous than famous, right?
Yeah. The one beside it's much more interesting for me, which is Last Separation, which again, a very modern film.
That's a great film. Yeah.
Fantastic. The fact that made it kind of jumps out because it doesn't seem to kind of fit with a lot of the kind of genre or the well-established choices that we've got on the list here.
Well, something that I wonder, because I know that that's a film that is regularly on film school syllabuses or syllabi or whatever. So a lot of people study a separation in film school now as like a modern film. So I wonder if newer directors are voting this one quite highly because they saw it in film school, and that's
an interesting point for sure.
This is great to see in the director's poll. And also my number one shock was that this did not make the top 100.
Yeah, on the critics.
I am absolutely baffled that this did not make the top 100 of the critics poll. So bizarre, but I guess people just don't think it's. I guess, but it's all down to do with the criteria, because I wouldn't put this in my top 10 favorite films of all time, but it's close contender for like top 10 most memorable and affecting films I've ever seen. Do you know what I mean? It's on that spectrum of like. Just some of the imagery is just burned into my mind, and it was a very moving and difficult watch, and it was also beautiful at the same time, because some of the cinematography in it's absolutely gorgeous, and particularly it being so important to what's going on today in the world, particularly from that region. I just thought it might have had some relevance for it to have been included, but I guess not. But yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, again, maybe people are scared to put filmmakers from certain countries on their list. I don't know, because of how it looks. You never know.
But both lists are very heavily represented by Abbas Kiarostami. Like, I think there's a lot of Kiarostami right throughout both lists, which I think speaks a lot to how his filmmaking's grown in reputation over the past 10 years.
He's the man. Where's the Friends house is in the director's poll, and I was like, what? Yeah. Like the gut punch of an ending. Yeah. I'm like, he nails those gut punch endings, Kiarostami. Yeah. Like Close Up is in my top 10 films of all time, and that is one of the most heart-wrenching endings to a film I've ever seen. Such a weird, it is a weird film. Like, he's so good at blending fiction and reality, and again with the Where's the Friend's House and its follow-up film, which I forget the name of. What's that one called? You got it behind you, Nathan?
It's behind his head. My wife walked in as that film was just in it, and I was in bits. And she had asked me, well, what's it about? And I started to tell her what the film was about, and I went, no, this is just pure folly. That's just the stupidest setup for a really emotional film, It shouldn't work.
What you just said, though, I think kind of hits at. I've had this conversation, especially since this poll's come out. I have several friends who are not in this space that I have around me, luckily, that I can have conversations with this. That person I was talking about Meshes of the Afternoon in particular with, who is very in tune with this list and seeing completely different changes. We had a good conversation about how you're describing something to other people and how your subjective viewing, because like you were saying, this list kind of has a barrier to entry because all these people who are voting watch films all the time and thinking like that. So I've always had a hard time when you ask that stupid question of like, what's your favorite film of all time? You know, that question is kind of ridiculous because of like, how can you can kind of hint at what you like, but like, how can you even get close to explaining why something is so important to you and why it means so much. And so it is interesting to kind of, you know, when you're talking to people who are not necessarily into film as much as we are, how we can be like, all right, well, if I just need to give you a quick short answer, let's go watch Lord of the Rings. You know, for me, it's like just go do that. And like, but how can I explain how much, like, why that means so much to me, or particular things in that. And I think, you know, Abbas Kiarostami is a perfect example of someone's like, how do you describe those films to somebody? You can't.
Yeah, no.
So
it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to actually like process in your own head like why it's good as well, because it's so complex in its construction. Like not complex like it's hard to follow, but it's so masterfully woven together that it's very hard for your own mind to comprehend why like it has such an emotional impact, because some of the images are so simple. Like, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen a hill or like just children in a classroom at the end of a film and stuff. It's just utterly human, basically. It just taps into something about the human condition, which Kiarostami did marvelously.
A lot of filmmakers don't know how to end a film, but he definitely does. You know?
Yeah, definitely. Who I was thinking about this the other day. Other directors that have really good endings. Oh, I think that completely different type of filmmaker, very much in the vein of genre, but I think David Cronenberg knows how to end a film. I think he generally lands his endings in a lot of his films. Kiarostami is another one. Yeah, that's a hard thing to do, to really like, because his endings are like have a lot of emotional weight, but in terms of like what's actually happening. Kiarostami, I'm talking about, there's not much is going on. It's not like this huge climax or a big, you know, action scene to finish the film off, or it's like over. There's no melodrama. It's just real, and that's very hard to capture sometimes in an authentic way without being too saccharine with it as well.
That film skirts that line so well, because it should be emotionally manipulative, but it doesn't. It's just kind of beautiful, you know, human spirit.
Well, just looking at the top 5 and the critics list, like besides, well, I would even argue number 4, all of those have incredibly memorable endings. So like I'm just looking at John Dielman, Vertigo, Citizen Kane, Tokyo Story, and In the Mood for Love. Like those endings in particular, I was thinking Tokyo Story might be the exception, but actually it has
maybe
well. It is interesting to think about like what's the first frame that we remember, and like what's, you know, the last frame, and what's all that stuff in between. Because a lot of the times I feel like with, you know, how we're processing things anymore, you know, we get a lot of that jumbled up. Like what's that middle part? You don't remember it. So the front and the back kind of work.
I think the emotional climax of Tokyo Story comes about an hour through the film, when there's a conversation between I think she's like one of the parents basically and one of the children when they're in the house and stuff, and it's about an hour through the film. I was in bits. I was like, what are you doing to me, Ozu? This is ridiculous. And I was like, this isn't the end of the film. What more am I in for? But thankfully the film it's fun. It's like an incredible film, but it's luckily for me, at least on my experience, it was less emotionally taxing. But there's a scene in the middle of the film which I was like very much hit by. Well, is there anything in particular that you guys want to bring up about the list that you're burning to talk about?
I think the next list, I think we're in a position where 100 films feels wholly inadequate.
Yeah, that's a good
given,
shout.
given the breadth of genre, types of filmmakers, the fact that, you're talking about westerns. I think there's only 2 westerns in the entire 100 list. If you went back 30, 40, 50 years, I'm sure that would have been much higher because of the popularity of that genre at the time. But so 100 films now that we're kind of getting so much more access to much more filmmakers, restorations. I think it kind of dilutes, if you like certain genres of films a lot. There's more than 2 films within that genre that are worth seeing, because really that's what the list is about. It's about trying to suggest these are things that are worth giving your time and discussing and talking about after the fact.
How do we feel about maybe in future polls actually having, maybe trying to divide it into genres or something like that? Because as you said, that there's so many films and there's so many different things that could be represented here that I feel like some things are getting left off.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't deserve to be left out of the conversation. But then I wouldn't know how to organize saying these are the top 10 science fiction films of all time, these are the top 10 horror films of all time, because there's obviously going to be crossover as well between genres, and like some films are like genreless, like this is like, and it's everything and nothing all at once. So that would be very difficult to do, but I do think them trying to attempt something like that would be really interesting. So
the data's there. The data has been collected. You can rarely represent it in as many different ways as you want, just even to create more discourse, because this has been awesome for like a week. Like, my Twitter feed's been filled up, Facebook been full of it, our group chat's been full of it for an extended period of time, to kind of say, like, isn't it just really interesting, the amount of things that we can discuss about all of these films and the place for them.
Cool. I think that's the end of the conversation for now. I thought we would be going on for hours, but I do only have like 10 minutes left to go anyway. So,
well, I have one question for everybody, which is,
go on then, fire away.
Which do you think is the biggest film to miss out in the next poll? You think a direction of travel of some films that are heading towards the bottom. That when we're looking at the films that didn't make it next time, you'd be like, oh, hi.
I think.
Yeah, if you bring up the list, let's have a look.
Sorry. There we go.
I think Poacher Eye would jump up a little bit more, maybe.
You think it will go up higher?
Maybe.
I think it'll sink like a stone next time. Down to and settle kind of 30.
Maybe that's recency bias. I just watched it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it though. It's so good. So good.
What's towards the bottom? If we just go down a bit. See, I think like maybe like Modern Times would drop out, because if 3 Chaplin movies have dropped out this time, I think Buster Keaton the General, that'll drop out.
Do you think something like Get Out is going to climb in 10 years' time?
It might get out.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest.
And things like Parasite. Yeah, I think it's incredible, but also I don't think it's belongs on this list.
It's beside Once Upon a Time in the West, which direction of travel is out of this list, which is phenomenal. If you ask me, it wouldn't make my top 10. Once Upon a Time in the West, even how close something is, like The Red Shoes is plummeting list on list.
Billy Madison would be there, right? Instead,
I mean, for sure.
I see. Sadly, I think like Blue Velvet won't be in the list next time, because it has dropped a bunch of places. This list. And then, honestly, I mean, you guys all know Lynch is my favorite director, but I don't think that Blue Velvet is in the top 100 films of all time. I think that Lost Highway is a superior film, personally, to Blue Velvet, but that's just my opinion on that one.
I think Miyazaki might jump up a little higher.
Yes, the Spirited Away.
I think Spirited Away will jump up to maybe the top 50.
I think stuff like some of the Mizuguchi films, they're going to drop, because I just think I mean, I love his films. I think they're absolutely amazing, but I think modern audiences just seem to not be that interested in Mizuguchi compared to Kurosawa or Ozu.
It's that genre of like sort of ghost story that Mizuguchi tends to tell, the kind of hauntingness, even whether it's ghost director abstractly.
What I find quite interesting is that I think Mizoguchi's so good at female characters and the way that they're written and the way he directs female characters.
Tortured, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like he'd be popular nowadays. If more people, watched his movies.
I love the earnings of Madame de in there as well. I think
Yeah.
Offals have been represented as excellent.
Has anyone seen Histoire du Cinema?
No.
Dar?
As I'll borrow it to check out.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on this film either. Pierre Le Fou.
Yeah.
Again, this one just had too much of a barrier to watching it just from a literary point of view. I think there's a lot of literary references in it, and it made me feel.
Oh, we've got you static again, Sam. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
No static.
No.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on there. Sorry about that, guys.
The Godard fans are trying to jump in.
Yeah,
Godard
they're
fans are-
interfering. But where was I? I was talking about Pierre Le Fou. There's like literary references in the film that like alienated me because I had no idea what they were going on about, and visually, like stylistically, I think the film is pretty impressive to look at, and it's quite interesting. But again, it's one of those things on an emotional level and even like on an intellectual level, I just felt excluded from it.
Yeah.
So,
I just think that there are much better French films that could be on this list.
Yeah,
So there's no Jacques Demy on this list, is there?
No Demy.
no Demy, no Clouseau. Like Les Dabelique could probably be worthy of being on this list. That's a really good film, actually, to suggest to people for their first time watching a French film.
Yeah,
like that's a very good entry point into,
or as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's very, very good entry points to like foreign cinema.
I think Playtime is my favorite French film.
Is it really?
Yeah, I think.
I think the hour or the 40-minute section in the restaurant is one of the most amazingly choreographed scenes in cinema history. I think it is incredible. There are some bits in the film that like the humor doesn't land for me, but yeah, the visually absolutely gorgeous to look at. And but yeah, that scene in the restaurant is just so playful. So I think Elliot's gone.
It hurts me that there's so much Robert Bresson, and Bresson's a great filmmaker, but he's kind of cold for me, and there's no Jean Renoir, for instance. He's kind of the antithesis of that as well. I have such a love for French cinema that this could be 100 French films, to be perfectly honest. I'd be happy enough.
Okay, guys. Seeing as our good friend Elliot seems to have maybe lost connection or got bored of us talking,
run out of coffee, possibly.
I think we'll call it there. There's always opportunities to talk about this list once we've had more time to sort of digest it and watch some of these that we haven't actually seen that are on the list, because there is definitely things. I'm assuming like Meshes of the Afternoon is like in the public domain maybe, or it's available to watch for free on YouTube or something like that, because it's such a short film. Like it's
I think Kino Lorber.
Hey pal, you're back.
Technical hitch.
That's okay. Just saying, we don't know if Meshes of the Afternoon is in the public
I think it is. It's
domain. I'm not sure how long it is. I can't see. My screen's not wide enough here. But yeah, we was just saying that we're going to cut the conversation now. Now that you've just joined back for this.
Sorry.
That's okay. And to say there's other opportunities to talk about this list in the future. Obviously, us guys will get together again for another Criterion Roundtable, because they're always fun. So yeah, any listeners who've managed to stick with us for an hour and 20 minutes talking about this poll, I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments what you think about the poll, anything you think that is like glaringly missing from this list, what you think about the number one pick. Please be polite and courteous in the comments, because I have seen some very vitriolic, opinions on a bunch of films that are in this list. And guys, it's just a subjective list. It's not the end of the world if your favorite film is in it or not in it, or what is number one. It's not the end of the world. So yeah, signing off. Thanks everyone for watching. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Take care. Bye.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.